The late afternoon sun pressed hard against the land, flattening everything in its path. The desert of 1881 was no place for hesitation. Thorn Maddox knew that well enough as he guided his horse through Sawtooth Valley, a winding passage between jagged rock walls that rose like the teeth of some ancient beast. At 45, Thorn carried the weight of years like the Springfield rifle across his back, with practiced ease that didn't diminish the burden. His weather-beaten face, framed by salt and pepper hair and a thick mustache, had seen too much war and wilderness to betray fear easily. But he felt it now, crawling up his spine like a rattlesnake. The saddlebags hung heavy with gold, payment for the bank and redemption springs. Without it, Maddox Ranch would fall to the creditors circling like vultures. The Civil War had left Thorn with nightmares and a Medal of Honor he kept buried in a drawer. Neither helped pay the debts his late brother had accumulated. The crack of a rifle shot split the silence. Thorn's horse reared as dust exploded from the rock wall inches from his head. He drew his Colt revolver in one fluid motion, diving from the saddle as two more shots rang out. Rolling behind a boulder, he caught sight of movement on the ridge. 3 men, rifles aimed. "Hand over them saddlebags, old man," a voice called out. "Ain't no shame in living poor." Thorn steadied his breathing, the way he had at Gettysburg when the Confederate lines surged toward his position. One shot, one breath. He fired, watching the first attacker clutch his shoulder and fall. The second shot came not from Thorn's gun, but from somewhere to his left. One of the bandits pitched forward, tumbling down the rocky slope in a cloud of dust and blood. The third man whirled in confusion, then fled on horseback as another shot kicked up dirt at his heels. From behind a cluster of rocks emerged a woman. Her raven hair hung in 2 long braids adorned with feathers and bone. The Winchester rifle in her hand still smoked. Her buckskin clothing, adorned with tribal patterns, marked her as Apache, but her eyes held something Thorn recognized immediately: the cold determination of a hunter. "You ride, foolish white man," she said, her English accented but clear. "3 wolves waiting, and you trot in like fat sheep." Thorn holstered his Colt slowly. "Didn't expect company in these parts." He nodded toward the fleeing rider. "Or rescue." "Not rescue," she corrected sharply. "That one who runs?" "Jake McCoy. Rattlesnake, they call him. I hunt him. You were in my way." The name hit Thorn like a physical blow. Everyone in the territory knew of Rattlesnake McCoy, leader of the most vicious gang this side of the Mississippi. Thorn had heard whispers in town about McCoy's latest massacre, an Apache settlement near Eagle Mountain. "You're a long way from your people," Thorn said cautiously. Her eyes flashed. "My people are dead, slaughtered by McCoy's men while they slept." She slung the rifle over her shoulder. "I am Iona, last of my clan." Thorn retrieved his horse, which had stopped nearby, still skittish from the gunfire. "Thorn Maddox, I own Maddox Ranch," she finished for him. "The valley with the 3 white peaks. I know it." She studied him with narrowed eyes. "McCoy speaks your name often. Says your land holds secrets worth killing for." A chill ran through Thorn that had nothing to do with the cooling desert air. "My land's just cattle range. Nothing more." Iona's laugh was harsh as the desert itself. "You truly do not know. The cave system beneath your ranch. The old ones called it Path of the Ancestors. It holds treasures my people protected for generations. Lady, the only treasure on my land is beef on the hoof, and even that's mortgaged to the eyeballs." Thorn mounted his horse, tipping his hat. "Thanks for the assistance, but I've got gold to deliver and a ranch to save. The gold in your saddlebags will not matter if McCoy reaches your home before you do." Iona pointed west. "His men rode that way at dawn, toward your ranch." Thorn's blood ran cold. His ranch hand, old Samuel, was alone there, an easy target for men like McCoy. He spurred his horse forward, then paused, looking back at the Apache woman. "You coming or not?" he asked gruffly. Iona's eyes met his, measuring him for a long moment before she mounted her own horse, a spotted Mustang that materialized from behind the rocks. "Our paths cross, Thorn Maddox," she said. "For now." As they rode hard across the open desert, neither spoke. The only sounds were the thundering hoofbeats and the whisper of the wind carrying a promise of blood and vengeance. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows that reached for them like spectral fingers. Maddox Ranch came into view as twilight painted the sky purple. The main house stood silent, no lantern light in the windows. The barn door swung open in the wind, creaking on its hinges like a warning. "Too quiet," Thorn muttered, drawing his Colt. They approached cautiously, Iona moving like a shadow beside him. The front door hung open. Inside, furniture lay overturned, drawers emptied onto the floor. No sign of Samuel. A low moan from the barn drew them outside again. They found Samuel slumped against a stall, blood darkening his shirt from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. His weathered face, lined with 70 years of hard living, was gray with pain. "They came looking for something," Samuel gasped as Thorn knelt beside him. "Map," they said, "to the hidden valley." Thorn ripped a strip from his shirt, fashioning a bandage. "What map?" "I told him I didn't know nothing about no map," Samuel continued, wincing. "Then that snake-eyed fella put this in me." He gestured weakly to his wound. Iona had disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a worn leather book. "They missed this," she said, holding out what appeared to be a journal. "Hidden behind loose boards in the floor. Your brother's name is inside." Thorn took the journal with hesitation. His brother William had been the dreamer, the scholar, always chasing legends while Thorn fought in the war. He'd returned home to find William dead from fever and the ranch nearly ruined. By lantern light, they examined the journal's contents. William's meticulous handwriting filled page after page with observations, maps, and translations of Apache symbols. The final entries detailed a vast cave system beneath the northern ridge of Maddox land, and a chamber filled with ancient treasures left by the first peoples to inhabit the valley. "My brother never mentioned this," Thorn said hoarsely. "He made agreement with my father," Iona explained. "Protection of sacred grounds in exchange for knowledge. Then my father died, and your brother soon after." Samuel's breathing had steadied. The bleeding slowed. He looked at Thorn with faded blue eyes. "McCoy's men said they'd be back by morning, with more men." Thorn closed the journal with a snap. "Then we've got work to do." They worked through the night, Thorn and Iona setting traps around the property while Samuel rested inside, rifle across his lap. They dug trenches, rigged tripwires, and positioned dynamite at strategic points. Skills Thorn had learned during the war and never thought he'd use again. As dawn approached, they took positions inside the house. The waiting was always the worst part of battle, Thorn remembered. The knowledge that blood would flow, but not knowing whose. "Your brother was a good man," Iona said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He understood the treasures were not for taking, but for protecting. The gold, the artifacts, they belonged to the earth." Thorn nodded slowly. "William always saw value in things I couldn't understand. After Gettysburg, I couldn't see much value in anything." Her eyes studied him. "You were a soldier. 16th Maine Infantry, held the line at Oak Ridge while the rest of the regiment retreated." His voice grew distant. "Lost 38 men under my command that day. Boys, most of them. Their ghosts ride with me still." The sound of approaching horses ended their conversation. Thorn peered through the window to see 6 riders approaching, McCoy himself at the lead, recognizable by the snakeskin band around his black hat. His face was a map of cruelty, with eyes cold as a reptile's and a scar that twisted his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Maddox," McCoy's voice carried across the yard, "we can do this easy or hard. The map and the gold. That's all we want. Thorn exchanged glances with Iona, who had moved to a window on the opposite wall, her Winchester ready. Samuel positioned himself at the back door, determined to fight despite his injury. "McCoy!" Thorn called back. "There are 3 guns pointed at your head right now. Turn around and ride out while you still can." McCoy's laugh was ugly. "Always the hero, ain't you, Maddox? Just like at Gettysburg. How many men died following your orders there?" The words struck like physical blows. How did McCoy know about Gettysburg? The answer came like a thunderbolt. The 3rd bandit from the ambush must have recognized him, must have served with him during the war. "Jenkins," Thorn muttered, "should have known he'd ride with trash like McCoy." The first shot shattered the window above Thorn's head. He ducked as glass rained down, then returned to fire. The battle erupted in earnest, bullets splintering wood, men shouting, horses screaming. 2 of McCoy's men triggered one of the traps, a thunderous explosion that sent them flying. Another stepped into a hidden pit, his screams cut short by Iona's precise shot. McCoy and his remaining men took cover behind the water trough and stable, laying down suppressive fire. A bullet grazed Thorn's arm, burning like a hot iron. He ignored it, methodically picking his targets as he'd been trained. One more of McCoy's men fell, clutching his chest. Then came the sound Thorn dreaded, Samuel's cry of pain from the back of the house. He turned to see the old man collapse, blood blossoming from his chest where a bullet had found him through an open window. "Go!" Iona shouted, covering him with rapid fire as Thorn rushed to Samuel's side. But it was too late. The old ranch hand's eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his final breath already faded away. Rage replaced caution in Thorn's heart. He grabbed a stick of dynamite, lit the fuse, and hurled it toward the stable where McCoy and his remaining man had taken position. The explosion shook the ground. Smoke and debris filled the air. When it cleared, the stable was a splintered ruin, but of McCoy there was no sign. "He's gone," Iona said, appearing beside him, her face streaked with gunpowder. "Escaped through the smoke." Thorn looked at Samuel's body, then at the destruction around them. His home, his last connection to his brother, lay in ruins. And for what? A treasure he hadn't known existed until yesterday. "We need to find this cave," he said grimly. "End this before McCoy brings back more men." They buried Samuel under the old oak tree where he used to smoke his pipe in the evenings. No word seemed adequate, so Thorn simply placed the old man's battered hat on the crude wooden cross. Using William's journal, they set out toward the northern ridge. The landscape grew increasingly rugged, a maze of box canyons and narrow passages that seemed designed to confuse and trap unwary travelers. The summer heat beat down mercilessly as morning turned to afternoon. "Your brother's map shows an entrance behind the waterfall in Devil's Gorge," Iona said, studying the journal as they paused to water the horses. Thorn frowned. Devil's Gorge is treacherous ground. Flash floods have killed more men there than bullets. "It is why my people chose it to hide our sacred places," Iona replied. "The danger protects what is precious." They continued on, the terrain forcing them to dismount and lead their horses. The sound of rushing water eventually reached them, unusual in the dry season. Devil's Gorge opened before them, a slash in the earth with walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. At its far end, a thin waterfall spilled from the cliff face into a small pool. "We're exposed here," Thorn warned, eyes scanning the ridgelines above. "Perfect place for an ambush." As if summoned by his words, a rifle shot echoed through the canyon. Dust kicked up at their feet. They dove for cover behind boulders as more shots followed. "3 shooters," Iona said calmly, pointing to different positions along the canyon rim. "McCoy will be watching the cave entrance." Thorn nodded grimly. "We'll need to create a diversion." He removed his hat, placed it on the barrel of his rifle, and slowly raised it above their cover. Immediately, shots rang out, striking the hat. While the shooters focused on that movement, Iona slipped around the boulder and fired 3 rapid shots. A cry of pain echoed from above as one of the ambushers fell from his position, tumbling down the canyon wall. The distraction allowed Thorn to target another shooter, his shot finding its mark. The man collapsed out of sight, but his rifle tumbled down the cliff face. The third shooter, now more cautious, kept them pinned with sporadic fire. Thorn and Iona exchanged looks, a plan forming without words. She fired several shots in rapid succession while Thorn sprinted to a new position, closing the distance to the waterfall. From there, he had a clear shot at the third rifleman. One squeeze of the trigger, and the threat was eliminated. "McCoy's still out there," Thorn called to Iona as she joined him. "Inside the cave," she confirmed. "He knows we must follow." The narrow gap behind the waterfall led to a dark tunnel that descended steeply into the earth. The air grew cool and damp as they ventured deeper, lighting a torch from Thorn's saddlebag. The walls around them were smooth, carved by water over centuries, occasionally marked with ancient handprints and symbols. "My ancestors recorded their journey here," Iona whispered, touching one of the painted symbols reverently. "These tell of a great flood that forced them underground. They found chambers filled with crystals that captured the light of the sun and stars." The tunnel widened suddenly into a vast cavern. Thorn held the torch higher, revealing a breathtaking sight. Crystal formations rose from floor to ceiling, reflecting the torchlight in thousands of rainbow fragments. At the center stood a stone altar, and upon it, artifacts of gold and turquoise, ceremonial items of immeasurable spiritual and material value. "All this time," Thorn breathed, "right beneath my land." "Not yours," came a voice from the shadows. "Mine now." Rattlesnake McCoy stepped into the torchlight, revolver aimed at Thorn's chest. Blood stained his shirt. He hadn't escaped the explosion unscathed, but his eyes gleamed with triumphant greed. "Drop the gun, Maddox," McCoy ordered. "You too, Apache, or I put a hole in the war hero here." Thorn carefully placed his Colt on the ground. Iona did the same with her Winchester, her movements slow and deliberate. "You were at Gettysburg," Thorn said, stalling for time as he assessed their options. "Under Colonel Chamberlain." McCoy's scar twisted as he smiled. "20th of Maine. Watched you sacrifice those boys at Oak Ridge while our regiment got all the glory for holding Little Round Top." He spat on the cavern floor. "They gave you a medal for sending those farm boys to die." "I followed orders," Thorn said quietly, "just like those boys did. And now you'll die in this hole. Just like them." McCoy's gaze shifted to the treasures on the altar. "After you helped me load up this pretty collection." He gestured with his gun toward a canvas sack at his feet. As Thorn bent to retrieve it, movement caught his eye. A shadow detaching itself from the darkness behind McCoy. Iona had somehow circled around while they talked. "You're wrong about Gettysburg," Thorn said, straightening. "Those boys didn't die for nothing. They died so others could live. Their sacrifice meant something." McCoy laughed. "Save the speech, Maddox. Just fill the—" The strike came swift and silent. Iona's knife flashed in the torchlight as she drove it into McCoy's shoulder. He howled in pain, his gun discharging wildly as he spun around. Thorn lunged for his Colt, rolling to avoid McCoy's next shot. The cavern filled with deafening gunfire and choking smoke. Crystals shattered as bullets struck them, raining glittering shards across the stone floor. Iona had retreated into the shadows, but McCoy's attention was now fixed on Thorn. They circled the altar, each looking for an advantage. Guns trained on one another. "You should have stayed a soldier, Maddox," McCoy taunted. "At least you knew how to die properly there." "I learned something else in the war," Thorn replied steadily. "How to wait for the right moment." The signal came as Iona's knife struck again, this time embedding itself in McCoy's gun hand. The outlaw's revolver clattered to the ground as he screamed in rage. Thorne aimed his Colt, finger tightening on the trigger, but hesitated. This man, for all his evil, had stood on the same blood-soaked fields at Gettysburg, had faced the same terror. That moment of hesitation nearly cost him his life. McCoy lunged forward with a hidden derringer, firing point blank at Thorne's chest. The impact drove Thorne backward, pain exploding through his body as he fell. Through a haze of agony, he saw Iona emerge from the shadows, her own knife finding McCoy's throat in one fluid motion. The outlaw collapsed beside the altar, blood pooling beneath him like a final offering to the sacred space he had defiled. Thorne's vision blurred. He felt Iona's hands pressing against the wound in his chest, heard her voice as if from a great distance. "Stay with me, soldier," she commanded. "Your ghosts do not call for you yet." Darkness took him then, carrying him into dreams of battle and blood. When consciousness flickered back, Iona was dragging him through the tunnel, away from the sacred chamber. Behind them, she had covered McCoy's body with stones in the Apache death ritual, not out of respect for the man, but for the sacred space he had violated. She had retrieved the gold and artifacts McCoy had gathered, returning them to the altar with whispered prayers in her native tongue. He awoke fully to pain and firelight. Night had fallen outside the cave. Iona had managed to bring him to the entrance, his chest now bandaged with strips of cloth, the bullet removed. "The Venom," Iona explained, seeing his questioning gaze. "From McCoy's derringer. Many outlaws coat their bullets with rattlesnake venom. I drew it out before it could reach your heart." Thorne tried to speak, found his throat too dry. She offered water from a canteen, supporting his head as he drank. "The treasure?" he managed finally. "Safe," she said simply. "Where it belongs." He nodded weakly. "Good." In the firelight, her features seemed softer than before. Or perhaps it was merely his brush with death that changed his perspective. She had saved his life twice now. "Your land holds more value than gold," Iona said after a long silence. "The sacred caves, the waters that run beneath the earth. My people believed they connected all living things. Your brother understood this." Thorne thought of William, of his passion for knowledge and respect for the land, of Samuel, who had tended that land faithfully for decades, of the ranch that was more than just property, it was legacy and responsibility. "McCoy's men will return," he said, "or others like them. Word will spread about the treasure. Then the land will need protection," Iona replied. Her eyes met his, a question in them. Thorne understood. Two wounded souls, both having lost everything except purpose. Perhaps that was enough to build upon. "We protected it today," he said. "We can do it again tomorrow." As dawn broke over the eastern ridge, they rode back toward the ranch house, or what remained of it. The journey was slow, Thorne's wound forcing frequent stops to rest, but each mile brought greater clarity. The land around them wasn't just dirt and rock. It was alive with history and meaning. They crested the final hill overlooking Maddox Ranch, just as the morning sun gilded the three white peaks that marked the property's boundary. Despite the destruction visible below, the burned stable, the bullet-riddled house, Thorne felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war. Hope. Iona rode beside him, her face turned toward the rising sun. "In my language, this valley has another name," she said. "Place where spirits rest." Thorne nodded, understanding at last what his brother had discovered here. Not treasure to be taken, but heritage to be honored. Legacy to be protected. "Then let's make sure they can rest in peace," he said. In the distance, a plume of dust signaled riders approaching from the east. Too many to be more of McCoy's men. His remaining gang members had scattered to the winds once word spread of their leader's death, like coyotes fleeing when the alpha falls. As the riders drew closer, Thorne recognized the lead man, Harrison Wells, representative of the Western Railroad Company, who had been trying to buy Maddox land for months. "Maddox!" Wells called out as they approached, his tailored suit and polished boots marking him as a man unaccustomed to desert life. I heard there was trouble. Seems you've had some damage to your property. The gleam in his eyes betrayed his true thoughts. Damaged property meant desperate owners, and desperate owners sold cheap. Nothing we can't rebuild, Thorne replied evenly. Wells glanced at Iona, poorly disguising his surprise at seeing an Apache woman sitting tall in the saddle beside a white rancher. The railroad's offer still stands, he said, recovering quickly. Though given the circumstances, we might need to adjust the figures. The land's not for sale, Thorne said firmly. Not today, not tomorrow. Everything has a price, Maddox, Wells countered, his smile never reaching his eyes. The railroad's coming through this valley whether you like it or not. Then it'll have to go around Maddox land, Thorne stated, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. Wells's smile faded. He tipped his hat stiffly. We'll speak again soon, he promised, turning his horse to rejoin his men. As they rode away, Iona looked at Thorne. Different enemies, she observed. Same greed. But this time we know what we're fighting for, Thorne replied. They rode down toward what remained of the ranch house. The work ahead would be hard, rebuilding walls, replanting fields, keeping watch for new threats. But for the first time since returning from the war, Thorne found himself planning for a future instead of just surviving the present. That night, as they sat by a campfire outside the damaged house, Thorne pulled out William's journal again. My brother wrote here about rebuilding the old north cabin, he said. Higher ground, better view of the valley, good place to start over. Iona nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. A good place to guard what matters. The ghosts of Gettysburg seemed farther away now, their voices quieter. In their place came William's voice, speaking through the pages of his journal. Some treasures aren't meant to be spent, brother. They're meant to be guarded. As the fire burned low, they discussed plans for watchtowers, defensive positions, and how to honor the sacred sites while protecting them from those who would plunder them. Two warriors from different worlds bound now by a shared purpose in the land that had brought them together. My people have a saying, Iona said as the night deepened around them. The land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. Thorne Maddox, rancher and reluctant guardian of ancient secrets, nodded in understanding. For the first time since the war, he felt at peace with his place in the world. The bloody valley had claimed enough lives. Now it was time for it to nurture them instead.